Good morning. Eddie here, Risk Management Lecturer of Think Education. And today we are going to discuss about the next module, which is basically the module 4. Again, we would like to recommend you to go through the learning materials, and this presentation only highlights some of the key concepts, so please find the details on your study guide. Okay, there are a number of things that I've been advising you, and by now I do expect that you have done this. If not, then you need to catch up. And again, please make sure you have downloaded the study guides, the assessment brief, assessment template, and subject outline. And please go through each module. Look, if you delay going through this module, you'll end up stacking up a lot of work towards the end of the course. So please make sure that you do that on regular basis. And assessment. This is our assessment schedule: week 4, week 7, and week 11. Okay, and please contact me if you need academic help. And that's my email address. Appreciate those who have been in touch with me, asking feedback and so on and so forth. And that's great. Keep doing that. Keep doing that. Okay. And I suggest you to go through the learning materials and assessment beforehand. Okay? And lastly, contact the Student Services Center for non-academic support. Okay, again, this is the objective of the subject. Oh, hi, how are you?
Hi, Eddie. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. We just start actually by going through, you know, my introductory slides. So yes, thanks a lot for coming. And if you want, you can also turn off your video if you like, because we are going to upload this on YouTube, and also sometimes we may have problem with the internet connection. Okay. Right. Yes. So we discussed these objectives of the subject: establish the risk context, identify risk, analyze risk, and also select and implement treatments. And we are actually towards the third and fourth objective after we discussed about risk identification in module 1 and 2. We analyzed the risk, and now we are also working on the treatment. With this module, we are going to discuss about the risk evaluation and risk prioritization. So a number of things that that we also need to look at from evaluating risks and also prioritizing risks. Okay, so the purpose of risk evaluation is actually to assist us in making decisions. So we evaluate the risk. Let's say when we are managing a project, we may need to go through a number of things, and one of them is basically to we may be able to list down a number of risks, for instance, but we may not be able to cope with those risks at once. That is the reason why we need to decide which one that we need to prioritize, and our prioritization is based on the evaluation that we need to go through. So that's the reason why we need to evaluate each risk to understand which one that we need to prioritize. Okay? Okay, so it involves the comparison about the level of risk that we find during the analysis process. So that helps us to understand which risk sits at what level, and that leads us to prioritizing them. Okay. Based on this comparison, the need for treatment can be considered. So we can make decision about the level of treatment, basically. Okay, evaluating risk for treatment, we can do qualitative with the 3x3 matrix. And in the previous module, I made my recommendations not to use 3x3. I would recommend people to use at least 5x5 matrix. The reason for that is because it is going to be more sensitive with 5x5 matrix rather than 3x3. Now, what do I mean by 3x3 matrix? 3x3 matrix, basically we use a 3 rating scale for both likelihood and impact or consequence. So we normally say low, moderate, and high. When we say low, moderate, and high, we are actually using 3x3 matrix. So we rate them using 3 rating scale. Okay, and again, highly recommended if you use a 5x5 matrix. That means we rate the risks from 1 to 5. Normally, we say we rate 1. We give a 1 rating scale if the risk is quite low, and 5 if it is quite high. Okay. Okay, let's say if we use 3x3 anyway, I'm using this qualitative analysis. So we use, for instance, in terms of qualitative analysis, we use observation, okay, data loss, okay, based on our observation, based on our experience in the organization, what is the likelihood we are losing data, okay? Let's say, yeah, the likelihood is quite low. We've been doing business so far. That's our experience. But if that happens, the impact is quite high. Okay, therefore, combining these two, we'll get a moderate rating score. Okay, so that moderate in here, the rating score in here is basically suggesting the level of risk for this one. Okay, and we analyze the other things like network speed, server downtime, email service down, and so on and so forth. What's the likelihood? What's the impact? Okay, so that's helping us to evaluate risk for treatment, basically. And some organizations use quantitative approach to evaluate the likelihood and impact. They analyze the likelihood and impact using numbers like this one here, rating scale, if you like, from they can use 10%, 30%, 50%, or 0.1, 0.3, and so on and so forth, and they map the risk against it. Okay, based on their quantitative analysis, they can determine what is the likelihood like. Okay, let's say the likelihood of the competitors taking actions against us when we launch the new product is quite high. Based on the previous experience, we look at the probability. Okay, we look at the probability. Yes, these guys normally do something when we launch new products. So based on that, we say that, yeah, the likelihood is quite high. Let's say 70%, 0.7. And what is the impact? Well, the impact is quite high as well, for instance. Okay, how high that is? Well, it could be somewhere between 0.4 or 0.8. Let's say we are leaning towards 0.8. So if that's the case, then 0.8 times 0.7 will get 0.56. That is quite high. Therefore, it comes into this red zone. Okay, so that's how we map the risk based on the quantitative approach. That means we are using numbers basically. And prioritize risk for treatment. The outcome of the risk evaluation is a prioritized list of the risks that need further action. Now, the question is, why do you have to prioritize? Why do you have to prioritize risk? In the project, in my experience, one of my previous jobs, for instance, we discussed together about the risks of launching a new product for our organization. And you may be surprised if I tell you that we came up with the 3 full pages of A4 size of paper when we list down the risks. Okay, and definitely we need to look at which one that we need to prioritize. Okay, now your assessment only in quote unquote requires us to list down 4 risks or 4 risk events. Okay, which are basically more manageable. But in real life, you may come up with much longer lists of risks. Okay. Therefore, we got to really prioritize it. We got to have a stringent process to prioritize it. Okay. Now, why do we have to prioritize it? Because these are some reasons why we need to prioritize them. It helps us allocating our resources. Remember, small, medium, or large organizations will always shout, "Hey, I have limited resources. I have limited resources." Okay. Now, what do we mean by resources? It could be people. All right, our staff. We may not have the staff looking after the risk. Okay, the risk that we identify, and if we agree we need to address that. We need to allocate resources such as staff, right, to look after it. Otherwise, no one is managing that risk. Okay, and the other resources that we may also need is the funding. We may need to allocate some budgets to help the staff managing them. Okay, and time as well. Okay. All right. So this helps the organization allocating their their resources in terms of addressing the risk. It also helps the organizations detecting risks that require attention from more senior management. So if we say the risk is quite high, how high that is, then we need to elevate that to the next level. Now, if you remember this diagram, let's say if certain risks come to this red zone, then as a project manager, we need to elevate that to the senior management to give them to give them an update, and also to invite them to step in to help us solving the risks. Okay? And normally, in terms of procedure, the one in the green zone, we will let our normal operation procedure to address that. Working with the certain department manager. And the one in the middle here, which is moderate, we normally, as the project manager, we normally step into that risk to help the relevant stakeholders addressing the risk. Okay, so that helps us detecting which one that we need to elevate, which one that we need to allow the normal procedure to solve the issue, and which one that we need to step in as the project manager to help solving the problem. And again, organizations have limited resources, so we need to make decision which one that we need to prioritize. Okay. Now, some experts suggest that when we prioritize, we need to look at when we prioritize that leads to allocating the resources. We need to think about, out of, let's say, a number of risks, which ones that we need to address so it can help us solving, let's say, 70 or 80% of the problem, so we can still move on. Okay. Some other experts, depending on the situation, suggest that we also need to look at the company situation. Sometimes the risk at the bottom may not be that critical in terms of priority, but it can be disturbing as well in terms of affecting the results. Okay, so we also need to look at the entire situation, but again, the main point is that we need to be able to prioritize risks for our treatments. Okay, referring to the likelihood and also the impact of the risk. Okay, and the other thing that we also need to consider is the organization's actions towards the risk. We may decide to accept or tolerate certain risks, and these are some reasons why we accept or tolerate. The risk may be low, and the cost of treatment is too high. If the risk is low, let's say, yep, we are going to lose, let's say, a couple $100, and the cost of treatment, the cost of treating the risk is even higher than that. We need to spend thousands of dollars, for instance. Then it may not be worth it for us to address the risk. Therefore, we normally accept the risk. And there is no effective treatment available yet. Okay, there is no effective treatment available yet. So let's say if we don't have ramp for to allow some people who need help to because these people may not be able to walk on the steps, and we need to actually prepare the ramp. Then and we don't have the resources to do it. Then it is probably more challenging for us to prepare the treatment in this situation. And the opportunities outweigh the risks. In the case of, let's say, launching new product, for instance, we, based on our research, we find that the opportunities are quite high in terms of the reward of the new product success, outweigh the risk. If we fail, well, we are losing a few $1,000, but if we are successful, then we are going to book a much larger success, for instance, then we do it. Okay, so there are some considerations as well in terms of treating the risks. So far, any questions, Mary?
No, good.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks. Put your hand up if you have questions.
I will do.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Now the question is, how do we know the risk is low enough to be acceptable? That leads us to question about ourselves actually as an organization. How do we say that it is low enough? The risk is low enough for us to accept it. Some scholars suggest looking at the size of risk or consequence in this instance, or impact in this instance. If that happens, what sort of dollars, if you like, that we are going to lose? Okay, so that helps us understanding it. Okay, some other scholars suggest a more comprehensive analysis by looking at the alarm principle, or as low as reasonably practicable category. So we map the risks or risks that we discussed. Let's say we come up with 10, 20 risk events, and we are going to map them based on this alarm. Okay. Now we have three categories in here. The first one is intolerable. Okay. So that they are the risks that we say, no, it is not tolerable because the quantified risk cannot be justified except in extraordinary circumstances. That's what we say. The second category is basically broadly acceptable, okay, provided that we have got the risk management system in place, okay, and it does not require expenditure or on further risk reduction. So we don't need to get to allocate more resources onto in our attempt addressing the risks. Okay? And the third category is acceptable or tolerable, and further risk reduction is either impracticable or too costly. If we try to reduce the risk further, it will be impracticable for us. So that's the third category. Now, this group is actually considered as the as low as reasonably practicable. Okay? All right. Now, probably this diagram helps us understand it better. Again, as discussed before, the first group in here is what we call as the intolerable region. Here we say that risk cannot be justified under any circumstances. If we try to address this, we need to spend, a lot of resources, and we may not have the capability to do it. Okay, in one of my in my experience, at one point of time, we wanted to launch a new product, and we understand that by the time our launch date is not acceptable because we will have monsoon in that country, for instance, by the time we launch this new product. Okay, and we say it is intolerable. We can't address that because it is nature, right? What can we do? So the options for us would be around delaying it. So we delayed launching this new product, and because we can't tolerate the impact. The next one is the tolerable. Okay, tolerable only if risk reduction is impracticable, or again if its cost is grossly disproportionate to the improvement gain. So if we spend money to try to fix it, we may even spend more resources than the benefit that we can gain. Okay? Or the residual risk tolerable, only further risk reduction is impracticable. So this is what we call as the tolerable group. Now the last group is broadly acceptable region. So here we monitor to maintain the assurance that risk remains at this level. So we keep monitoring that it remains at this level. Okay? So in practical terms, what we can do is basically for our organization, we can also map the risk based on the level of tolerance that we can address. The first one being intolerable, and the second and third group would be tolerable, and the last group is basically the one that we can accept. Yes, we accept it, and we just need to monitor it. Okay? So there are the three categories that we need to understand from managing the risk perspective, managing the risk priority perspective. There are several questions. Of course, the list may go further than this. These are just some ideas to ask the questions when we put certain risks into either tolerable, broadly accepted, and intolerable. Okay. The first one is technically whether it is possible to reduce the risk further or not. So have we got the technical capabilities or not? If we haven't got the technical capabilities, then we need to decide whether it is intolerable or we can't do anything. Who gains the benefit and who wears the costs? Is it us? If it is us, what department will wear the cost? And so on and so forth. And from ethical perspective, we also need to ask ourselves whether it is acceptable. And do we have the information to make the decision? And what happens if we do nothing to reduce the risk? And that is also bringing us to the question about likelihood and also the size of impact. If we don't do anything, are we going to lose certain resources, or are we going to damage our brand? Okay, so that's another thing. Aside from financial costs, we also need to consider the other areas, such as in this instance, non-financial costs, such as our brand reputation, or whether we are going to have the legal issue or not. Okay, so that's another thing that we can also ask ourselves. What happens if we do not proceed? We cancel the project, for instance. What will happen? Well, one of the possible event that might happen is that a competitor may action to it. They may come up with their own products to penetrate the market, and they take risks. Okay. Organizations normally also have standards to determine if risks are acceptable or not. So they've got the kind of rules of thumb, if you like. This is also related to risk attitude of the organization, how much risk they can accept, or how much risk they can they need to reject, or what kind of risk that they can ignore. Okay, especially if you work in financial organizations, financial sector industry, you will have this kind of standard as well. Right? And again, this is the 5x5 matrix I suggested last time, and I would bring this again to our discussion, because this helps us understanding the the risk events in more sensitive rather than 3x3 matrix. Rather than assessing them into low, moderate, and high, we can map them using rating scale, a 5 rating scale from 1 to 5, for instance. And we normally say 1 is rare, 5 is quite certain in terms of probability or likelihood. Okay? So how do we normally substantiate it why we say high? Let's say if we say high like certain 5, for instance, we normally explain the symptom from qualitative perspective, or we can also refer to the statistical analysis to determine whether a risk event, the likelihood of risk event is quite high, okay, like 5, for instance, okay? And as an example, if we are organizing a charity event, outdoor activity, and we look at the weather forecast, okay, what is the likelihood of raining? Okay, and we look at the weather forecast. That's another. That's the information that we can use to determine whether the likelihood is quite high or not. Consequence or impact, again, we also rate it from 1 to 5. And again, as I discussed before, 5 rating scale is more sensitive rather than 3 rating scale, more diagnostic for us to understand the level of risk. Okay, 1 is normally determined as defined as insignificant. If risk happen, yeah, we are losing $100. That's fine, we can accept it. Okay. And again, the level of consequence would be determined by the organization's risk attitude as well. Okay, let's say for some organizations, losing $1,000 may be fine, but some other organizations may say, "Hang on a second, my business is small, so losing $1,000 is quite large for me. That's the size of losing $1,000 is huge for me, so I can't ignore it. I need to address that." Okay. And 5 is normally defined as catastrophic. So from OHS perspective or work health and safety perspective, catastrophic could be someone dies, for instance, or someone needs to be in hospital, stay in the hospital if risk happens for for a quite long period. That is the reason why we claim it is catastrophic. Right, similar to the previous one, we can also map them using these 5x5 matrix, probability and consequence. Here we have the 1 to 5 of probability, and consequence or impact we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we multiply those 2 variables, probability and consequences, to map where risk sits. Okay, so if let's say if we have a risk event, for instance, the likelihood of accident happen because of hazards that we identify at the workplace, the likelihood is quite high. How high is the likelihood? Let's say 5. Okay, so it's quite high, very high. Okay, it's certain to happen. And what about the consequence or impact? Well, it's also quite high because someone may need to be to stay in the hospital for quite long period. So that means 5 as well. Well, 5 by 5, we get 25. Okay, so that is very, very high. Now, similar to the previous slide, if you look at this, we have 3 regions in here. So risk levels that fall in somewhere between 1 to 6. We normally consider that as low. Okay, so we would allow the normal procedure at the workplace to action to it. And risk that falls under somewhere between 8 to 12 will be considered as quite as moderate in terms of risk level. Okay, so we would normally step in as a project manager. We would normally step in to help solving the problem. And the next one is basically the risk that falls between 15 to 25. This one here is considered as very high. So this is when we need to get the our senior management team to step in. Now this one is from the Project Management Institute, the organization who produced the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge. They they actually classify risk into threats and opportunities, because remember, risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty. Since it is uncertain, it can be positive, it can be negative. Okay, and some risks may be a threat, maybe negative for us. Okay, some other risks may be opportunities. Okay, like new product launch, for instance, it is more into risk opportunity. What does risk opportunity mean? Well, we are doing this because we want to capture certain opportunity. If we don't do it, we will lose this opportunity. Okay, and the other one is threat. Threat in here is basically we got to manage it because that is threatening our business, our achievement in achieving the objective. Okay, and again we map them based on likelihood and impact. Okay, impact and likelihood in here would be measured in the most sensitive way, from 5%, 10%, 20%, 40, and 80%, which is considered as as very high. Okay, so if you say that the likelihood of something to happen is more than 70%, that is quite high. It is more into this area. And if the impact is also quite high, let's say you are losing $100,000, well, by any company standard, $100,000 quite high, then you can map it as, you can rate it as more than 80%. It could even be 90%. So that may stay in here, somewhere in here. Okay. All right. So that's another way to look at the risk priority. And now this is showing us the same thing in terms of mapping risks. Another way to map the risk based on likelihood. Here, almost certain, likely, possible, unlikely, and rare. And this and the rest is basically about the impact from negligible into severe. So if we say the one risk event, the likelihood of one risk event is likely, okay, so it sits in here, and the impact is actually moderate, then it sits in here, right? High. So the level of that risk would be quite high for us. Okay. Again, I would recommend you personally to use the 5 rating scale, so we can map them based on this risk register. And by the way, the risk register is something that we need to develop for our assessment. Okay? Let's say we have risk event A. The likelihood of risk event A to happen is 2. The impact is high. The impact is 5. That means high. Okay, and what about B? This is the second risk, risk event B. Likelihood is 3, the impact is 4. Based on our analysis, based on discussion with the stakeholders, we got 4. And the next step is to analyze the risk level, likelihood times impact. Okay, 2 by 5 is 10, and 3 by 4 is 12. Based on this analysis, B is higher, the level of the risk level of B is higher than A, therefore that becomes priority 1, and A will become priority 2. Okay, and then we outline the treatment plan, action plan, person in charge, due date, and we normally do what we call as the risk assessment. Now, what do we mean by risk assessment? It is actually, look, along the way, if you recall our risk management process framework, we have what we call as monitor. Along the way of this treatment plan being implemented, we need to keep monitoring it. So because it may develop to something else, or we also need to reassess it. Okay, yes, we have done this. Now, what about the likelihood? What about the impact? Have we cushioned the impact? And we expect that since treatment plan may require resources from our organization, we expect the risk priority would drop. Let's say the risk level would drop. The impact has been cushioned, so it has come down from 5 to 4, for instance. As a result, the risk level will come down from 10 to 8. And here, in risk reassessment, we say it has come down from risk level 10 to risk level 8, for instance, as a result of our treatment plan. Okay? All right, so that's basically our topic in this module. Any questions so far, Mary?
No, we've done it.
All good?
Yep.
Okay. Look, thanks a lot for coming, and please do not hesitate to get in touch with me if you need help. And I'm glad that a lot of students have been getting in touch with me, sending emails. Yeah, and if you haven't received my email the next day, please do not hesitate to remind me because sometimes I may have system issue. Okay. All right. All the best, Mary. Have a
Okay.
good one.
You too.
Okay. Bye.